This conference will now be recorded.
Sure. Mary Benton. Here. Lloyd Colston. Here. Brandon Jones. Not here. Ian Kuhn. Here. Kyle Lewis. Here. Cody Richardson. Here. And Tom Wheatley. Here. I love working with two monitors. It doesn't work very well sometimes.
This time, planning commission members are asked to make a declaration of conflict of interest or any ex parte or outside communication that might influence their ability to hear all sides of any item on the agenda. So they might come to a fair decision. Is there any conflict of interest?
Wouldn't think so on this.
So, persons who wish to address the planning commission regarding items not on the agenda, speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Any presentations for information purposes only, actions will not be taken. So any comments from the public on items not on the consent agenda?
As a commissioner, would bring up just as not to discuss, but just a matter of interest. In previous meetings, we've talked about marketing our community. And in a recent trip, I discovered that Park City has stuff in the rack, but Calhoun County, Park City doesn't. I also am a member of the Automobile Association of America, and they have a nice little product called the Tour Book, which is no longer in print, but you can read it online. Park City's entry in the tour book consists of 2 things, the chamber and the hotel. And I asked them, how do you get stuff in the tour book? Send it to us. They're not going to take our word for it, but they're going to investigate the item, and then they will include it or not include it based on their editorial policy. Thank you.
I think we talked about, what was that magazine?
A few months ago, there was a Kansas tourism book, and the chamber's been advised and have some entries in that. I'll pass it on to them as well.
I think we made some amendments to the comprehensive plan, and there's some kind of actions.
To market us some other. Something along those lines. We'll get that.
Yeah, free marketing, absolutely.
Yeah, nothing better than free.
I was always told nothing was free. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So, recognition for this town is important. I think the Echozoa discovery is going to help out as well. Some recognition, which ultimately more interest will result in possibly more grants, more funding, things will be nice. So next we'll move on to the meeting minutes. Is there, I get a motion to approve the last?
Second.
Motion, meeting minutes from last month. Approved. I'll go in the record. It looks like we have a public hearing next. We'll hold a public hearing to consider the advisability of amendments to Article 48, floodplain management.
When we enter into the public hearing.
Second. Now we'll move into public hearing. Josh, can you give us a little insight?
Summary.
Sure can. Okay, so the reason we are doing this today is because the city is interested in entering into the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, Community Rating System, or CRS. It's the federal government, so there's all sorts of acronyms. One of the things that we have to do in order to get to that program is we have to go above some of the minimum requirements that are part of the National Flood Insurance Program, which is what we have, how we get flood insurance. You have to be a part of that program. So there's, and in order to encourage communities to strengthen their standards a little bit, they actually offer incentives to the policyholders. And one of those incentives is discounts on their premiums, on their flood insurance premiums. So that's the fruit that they give you for doing these higher standards. Some of the standards that we'll have to do are staff items on how we manage the program. We have to be able to prove that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing. So some a little more paperwork, that sort of thing. But these amendments is the stuff that I did have to go through the process of a public hearing, and we'll eventually have to go before the city commission for their approval in the form of an ordinance. The way this one works, the floodplain management ordinance is adopted by reference into the zoning regulations. And that is part of the reason, that's the reason why we're having a public hearing at the planning commission level. These amendments are to an ordinance that was adopted in 2010. That is the last time that we received new flood maps of the city. It was about that time frame. And so this is kind of an update. We're not updating maps with this amendment. However, FEMA is working on new maps for the community. Probably will still be a couple more years before they get done with that process. But the idea will be that they'll be more accurate than they are today, which is a positive. I also have Tara Lanthrath and Cheyenne Sun Eagle from the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Water Resources on the call. So if we have some questions for them, they are here to talk about that. Let's see, how do I want to do this? So in the packet for the planning commissioners, there is a list, the entire ordinance is in there, but there's also a listing of some of the proposed changes to this. And I will go ahead and go through those. I won't take a ton of time, but I think it's important for everybody here to hear what those proposed changes are. So let's just get down to it.
Before you start in that, would you explain to the public what the benefit of being in CRS is to the taxpayer?
It provides a discount for the flood insurance premiums.
Okay.
So there's not a ton of changes that are proposed in here. Our ordinance was based off of the model FEMA ordinance that actually DWR modified for Kansas, but there are some that are a little different. For one of the changes for agricultural structures, previously this is actually going to be easier to deal with. Used to require a variance to be placed in the floodplain. They will no longer require that, but the rest of the requirements for those structures are still going to be the same. Accessory structures are kind of the same thing. Typically in the past, in order to place an accessory structure in the floodplain with slightly lefter regulations, you had to have a variance to do it, and that will no longer apply. This will now apply to structures that are up to 600 square feet. Any structures that are larger than that have to be flood-proofed or elevated, at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation. But this, for anything that's under 600 square feet, we can allow as long as they are at the current level, as long as they are wet flood proofed, which means that the water from the flood can enter the structure, and the structure has to be properly anchored down.
Can you burn the property without elevating it?
That would be fill in the floodplain, which would require a permit.
Do you have a map of showing the area?
Mhm. I can pull that up. I'll just do that at the end. Another change is to critical facilities. And critical facilities are places like schools, nursing homes, hospitals, and most government facilities, like City Hall, for example, would apply to that. The requirement is getting strengthened there. Typically, like your normal structures around town, in order to be built in a floodplain, they have to be elevated 1 foot above the flood level. For these critical facilities, they have to be elevated to the 500-year flood level, so it's much higher. And this is actually going to take us to 1 foot above that level. So there's some areas in town that if you're going to put a critical facility there, you're going to have to elevate it a lot. That's just to be safe for those facilities. Checking into the facilities that are near those areas. The middle school would be one of those that's kind of in that area, so they would have to comply with the new stuff. Jefferson Elementary is really close. Medicologist is kind of on that fringe as well. Our hospital, of course, is nowhere near the floodplains, being up north. And the city facilities, I'm pretty sure all of them are well away from the floodplain. So it won't affect current facilities very much at all. Our well houses also, I guess, are a city facility that had to be elevated. When we redid some of those, if you go out with the town, you can see some of those are up on really, really high berms. That's to get to that 500-year level. And we had to do that in order to get we had a hazard mitigation grant that was used for some of that. Another new change that hasn't been in there in the past is the mechanical equipment, like your air conditioner condenser. There's currently not a requirement to elevate that, but for new construction with these new provisions, that would have to be elevated to the same level that the lowest floor is at, which would have to be 1 foot above the flood elevation. Again, that's for new construction and substantial improvements. So if you have a home today that you're not compliant with, that's okay. That's what flood insurance is for. But that's a requirement in order to reduce those payouts for new construction. Manufactured homes, there's some changes there. Previously, you just had to have the bottom of the chassis 36 inches above grade. The problem with that is sometimes grade is well below the base flood elevation. And so we're changing that language to match what would be required for a site of homes. So with 1 foot above that flood elevation instead. That could actually be less in some instances, but it standardizes that. It also matches what's in the building code as well. Temporary structures are kind of like those other two kind of structures, agriculture and accessory. You used to have a variance for them. We won't have to do that anymore. Not a big deal. We don't have to deal with those a lot. We're talking about construction trailers primarily that are doing stuff in the floodplain. Another change, the section on violations for people that were in violation of these regulations, that section has changed, will change with these changes. The idea is to better describe the process for how those work, what's required. It's not described very well in the current ordinance. And this would clarify to make it more in line with traditional code enforcement actions that staff already uses for other zoning regulation violations. And finally, the last change I'm going to talk about is not really a change per se, but it was what I mentioned earlier. Because this is adopted by reference, this ordinance is adopted by reference into the zoning regulations. We're having this public hearing here instead of at the city commission level. The city commission, if they want to have another public hearing down the line, can at their option, but it wouldn't be required. Beyond that, I listed out the specific changes to each section, but I would imagine in the interest of time, I will not go through each individual one. Probably a bit much. There is one other thing I should just note, and that is there are some new definitions that are added into the new ordinance to better reflect the standards that we go through now.
All this information is all this information on the city website.
There is a zoning regulations part of our website, and all of these amendments, including the entire ordinance is on there. Everything I just talked about is on there, and all of the specific changes are also on there.
We notified all the residents that are affected, or all the businesses, or any kind of structures that are affected by this.
Yes, I sent letters to everybody that has property that's even remotely touched by floodplain. In fact, I talked to somebody today who barely had a slipper, and I tried to remove some of those, but yes, everybody was notified.
When was the last time we had a federal evaluation of floodplain as a zone now, or as it's designated?
2010.
Was that before or after the new dike was built, or the bypass dike? Nothing changed? Was it?
Nothing changed to the flood zones since then.
So after they built the dam, did another evaluation to determine what would be considered in the flood?
What they're doing now, why we're reevaluating, for one thing, the mapping, the technology they use to do mapping is more accurate than it was even in 2010. They're using some more engineering. They're taking into account some of the things, some of the changes, but they're taking into account where flooding has happened. In 2019, when we had all the flooding around here, we found some places that flooded that were not in the floodplain. And there probably was a few places that didn't flood that were,
So
they're not flood every time.
So after collecting the actual data instead of the engineering, calculations, assumptions, has there been any news designations since that happened?
Yeah, there hasn't been.
2010.
Yeah, nothing has changed. The only thing that's changed since 2010 is when people have requested revisions to them. So if they were building in the floodplain and they brought their structure up to the proper elevation. And there's been a few cases where people have basically what you do is you petition FEMA. You have some survey information that proves that your structure should not be in the floodplain. So there's been a few cases like that. That doesn't change what's actually on the map, but those properties have proved that they're not, so they wouldn't have to have flood insurance.
Would it possibly be more effective to have a citywide survey designate floodplain based on current data?
That's kind of what they're doing. The city can go into a system where they supply that very, very detailed information. However, it is very expensive. Where it's used a lot is like in coastal areas where they have flood walls and such like that. And we would obviously, if we were going to have another levy or something like that, we're not. But if we didn't have levies today and we built levies, that kind of information would be heavily used in order to map.
Sorry. Neither.
No, I think that's pretty much it. I guess the only other change I should note is in the zoning regulations, the only thing that changes by us doing a revision is an ordinance reference number. So, I could probably put it in here somewhere, but, yeah, I did. That's the only thing that's going to change in the zoning regulation document, is just that number. And obviously I can't actually change that until it's actually adopted by the city.
This information also lists the fines that are incurred by the zoning regulations.
That is not specifically in the ordinance because the city has a comprehensive fee schedule.
There will be because of fines.
Yes, there actually is today.
Okay.
If you're totally out of compliance, you refuse to comply, then you can't be taken to court, just like any other.
So this is just in addition to something that's already in place.
Yeah, well, actually, that's already in place. The violations, there's already is a section on violations.
Okay. I mean, these new violations are in addition to the old violations.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is increased above that.
People take comments from the public.
I just have a couple of questions. These proposed changes on the accessory structures and agricultural structures, are those only on new construction? Or is it
Yes,
only on new construction?
or substantial improvement. So it's like it partially,
And what do you consider substantial?
if
Is
it's
there
more
a
than,
percentage?
yeah, it's more than 50% of the fair market value, then it is considered a substantial improvement.
So there's like a grandfather clause.
It's essentially,
Short.
I have another one, I'm sorry.
that's right.
I've been through a lot of stress with this whole thing, so. For instance, our heating and air conditioning unit sits on with our foundation of our main building. If we have to replace that, does that have to be at the new flood level?
No, not necessarily, because the substantial improvement is the entire,
I think that would be considered over.
yes.
Although, sure,
I would agree.
So the question for critical facilities, does that also apply that this is a grandfathered in at this point? Is it new construction only?
Yes. So if you have an existing critical facility, and critical facilities are defined, what actually applies there.
I assume that includes schools.
Yeah, schools, hospitals, probably certain medical, I would guess the medical clinics are on the list.
So there is a list. Okay.
And it's in the,
I see what it's like.
Yeah, and I don't
No,
know. I don't think any of those have changed, the listing. Those are the same as they were in 2010.
I just want to make sure all this information.
Absolutely.
You said that if your home in your area or whatever is up to those new standards, then your flood insurance could go down? Or will it go down for everybody that already has flood insurance?
Actually, my understanding is that's a citywide thing. So if the city does the things that are necessary to, but what it is it's got like a tiered system. So the more things that we do as a city, the more points we get. And the more points you have, that greater that discount is.
I would check with your insurance.
Yes.
First.
Yes.
Are you saying the city's insurance policy?
No, the individuals,
Okay.
individual city.
But the whole goal of this is to save money on
That's private.
personal insurance policies?
Yes,
Okay.
because I know those are pricey. And that's the idea. And FEMA really wants people, everybody to have flood insurance, but we all know that because it's expensive, not everybody that's in the floodplain.
I'm for the critical facilities is listed on page 11, number 9, paragraph A, includes government buildings, if the government owns it. Police stations, fire stations, hospital, orphanages, payment institutions, communication centers, water and sewer pumping stations, water sewer treatment facilities, transportation maintenance facilities, places of public assembly, emergency aviation facilities, and schools are listed by name.
So this is the new wastewater treatment plant additions, or we have those extra requirements.
They're protected by the levy. So they are not in the floodplain, unfortunately.
As long as the levee stays dry.
Yes.
More questions from the public?
When do you expect this to go through where we would, let our individual insurance companies know if the city is now doing this?
This ordinance is only a part of it. Currently, I am in a process, I am acting as the floodplain administrator for the city of being evaluated. The state's doing the evaluation, but also there's an agency called the Insurance Services Office, ISO. They determine what rates are in the city. They do more than just floodplain. They also do stuff like fire protection. So they cover your other risks too. But we have to go through that whole process. It probably will be into next year before that actually happens.
When you send out letters,
There'll be some, I'm not sure exactly how that process works, but there'll be some sort of notification that lets people know that the status has changed and now you're hopefully the premium.
That's what your agent will want, ISO rating, is every piece of real estate, what number is that? So they've got to be involved.
any more questions? Public concerns? If there's no more comments from the public, on.
No, I guess from the state, want to say anything?
Tara or Cheyenne, did you want to add anything to what I said?
Nope, I think you got it, Josh. Sounds pretty consistent with everything that we've gone over. We are almost done with the audit, so the evaluation that we've been working on, we are down to just one item. So once we get that closed, you'll have 6 months to apply to the CRS program. So might be able to move with that, as Josh said, next year early.
And I don't have anything else to add. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Look from the other commissioners.
Yes. In previous meetings, you've heard me mention my concern for wildfire in Conway County. And how does that relate to floodplain management? It relates this way. When you have a wildfire, what's left is called a burn scar. That burn scar doesn't hold water well. That burn scar will allow a thunderstorm that would normally going to produce flooding in the floodplain to produce flooding in the floodplain, which means that if you have a non-flood related flood and don't have flood insurance, you're in trouble. That's why you saw, if you remember the video of Katrina, the houses in the flood were on fire because insurance will pay for a fire, but it won't pay for a flood. Therefore, it's important that we remember all hazards related to this. And Josh, hazard mitigation, you mentioned that. How does this impact our hazard mitigation grant? Does it help or hurt?
Certainly wouldn't hurt us.
No, it wouldn't.
Anytime that our standards are increased above the minimum standards of the NFIB, that's always going to be looked at positively. So it should increase our chances of being able to get those kind of grants in the city.
And I will mention this, that if you're not in a county that is declared a federal disaster for some event like a winter storm, hazard mitigation is declared statewide, not just the counties that were impacted. So if you have your hazard mitigation plan up to speed, you can attract more federal dollars. And Josh has just said, if your CRS is better, then you are in better. All of the FEMA grants are competitive. So if you want to be in a competitive state with FEMA, be a CRS level 7 rather than 0. And by the way, Tulsa just became a CRS level 7 community, one of the 2 largest communities in the United States with that rating. So the more you compete for the grants, the more money you'll get. And the more that you do this kind of stuff to compete for the grants, the better chances you have of getting that grant. Yes, it is political, but it's all about paperwork too. It is all about paperwork. Right, Josh?
Yep, lots of paperwork.
So what kind of savings will the city see on insurance? You don't have to give me a dollar amount, but is it significant or?
If we were to get it to the lowest level, it starts out like 5%. And for each level you go up, it adds another 5%. I think the top level, like Tulsa's probably getting about 40% savings on theirs. Now we're not trying to do that because that's going to, there's some stuff in there that we just aren't going to do as this one. But we can go up as high as we want.
And the idea too is we're not just competing for our citizens can have lower insurance rates. This is taxpayer dollars that pay for this stuff. So if we are going to compete for Homeland Security, FEMA, hazard mitigation grants, we need to be on the, because yes, it came out in Facebook this week that grants are not 100%. And that's true. But would you rather pay 100% of something, or would you rather pay 50 or 70 or 80% of something? So that's the choice that we're going to be as we go into the CRS system.
When you said tax dollars pay for this, what are you?
All your government taxes, it's all tax dollars that pay for this. It's FEMA takes a chunk of the federal budget that your senators and congressmen approve, are supposed to approve. They take that money and FEMA gets a portion of that.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, not property tax.
No, it's not property tax this time.
It's up to the individual citizens to make these upgrades.
Correct.
On their own.
And for the government to make the upgrades, there is hazard mitigation grant funding possible through FEMA.
Well, we have some citizens here. I think, if I can speak, I think they're concerned with the cost of these upgrades. But to me, it sounds like it's already in place. It's grandfathered in, so I don't see costs being concerned. If you're building a new house, it's probably insignificant. They sound pretty insignificant. I mean, build dirt, raise the pad, cost you more, but in the end, it all ultimately saves you money on insurance.
And maybe probably flooded.
Yeah.
I'll quickly add though that just because you build a house in a floodplain doesn't mean your house is not going to flood in 100 years.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
That's
So
yeah.
that also doesn't mean that you.
That's why you have flood insurance.
Exactly. If you're not in the floodplain, the thinking is often, well, I don't have to have flood insurance until the flood comes. And then you try to get it and you can't because it takes 30 days for flood and earthquake insurance to kick in.
Let's see if I can pull up the flood maps, because we talked about that.
Yes, please.
Forgive me, this is kind of a chore to do this.
Is this openly accessible to everybody?
Yeah, that's what I just did there was, it came right from the city's website.
Okay.
I was gonna pull up my own internal one, but I believe that the layer is in here. It's working today. So yeah, there's the 100-year. This is the flood.
Yeah, we have to go to-
Don't think I can turn those address points off, so sorry, that's a little crowded. But anywhere on this map, these are the floodplains. So the Ark River is over here, and the Walnut's over there. Anywhere that has this hashed area is the floodway, which is increased. We don't really talk about floodway at all today. Increased standards, you really can't, you're really not supposed to build anything in those areas. We have a little bit of that in some of our populated areas up here, the Grand Meek area, right along that canal. Anything that is in the blue shading, that's the 100-year flood. That's the area that I'm guessing most of the people that are here tonight have some property in that area. And if there's any, you really can't see it on
Can you
this
just
thing.
show the middle school in there? I feel like I've looked at this at one point and it feels like the middle school is like, why does it look like it's not in it? Is it or is it not?
The building itself is not in the floodplain. The property around it is. So what they did was they elevated.
Kids and, get away.
Just a little bit.
Yeah,
You said that the,
Jet skiing.
that property just on the northwest corner there, on the roundabout.
Yes. It's a little higher than some of the surrounding area. That's why it's not in there. But yeah, I believe the middle school, when they built that, they specifically elevated it so that it came out. So that's an example of when that worked.
Yeah.
And of course, it was built before 2010, so that's why it's actually reflected.
And when FEMA redoes their firms, this will change. We don't know how until the maps come out, but just expect that this will change and that
How
stuff
often
is
do
not
they
changed.
change the maps? You know how often they change the maps?
Before the last firm, it was 2000s. Before 2000, it was about 10 years apart or longer. It was longer.
Now, we did get one in 2006.
Yeah.
Because of the leaks. So we got new maps in 2006.
Right. But that stuff in blue, when the maps change, may not necessarily, that blue will expand more likely because they have to keep the maps current regarding to the loss potential.
So earlier you said that in 2010, floodplains were changed after bypass dike was built. So that wasn't based on the FEMA floodplain maps. If that would change, the last one came out in 2006, that would.
I can't remember what the reasoning was for I think the 2006 was done, and then in 2010, they kind of changed how they do mapping.
Was that conducted by FEMA or was
Yes.
that? Okay.
Yeah, this whole process is spearheaded by FEMA. And then the state, like Cheyenne and Terrence's office basically helps us with the process.
When was this map?
This is 2010.
Okay.
One other savings because of CRS. You see this more in fire service, but if you're building in floodplain and building according to standard, theoretically, your response and recovery cost will go down, not only for the owner, but for the community as a whole who has to pay in some to the fire department, and the police department, and
Tax,
everything related to response.
My train of thought was, if FEMA changes their map, are we gonna have to change our regulations or are we gonna, is that gonna take some of these residents out of that zones?
Can't say for sure one way or the other because I just don't know.
When this happened in 2010, the citizens that got the letters from the government, the county and the cities that sent out letters to their citizens said, by the way, you're now in a floodplain. You have to be aware of that. I can't make you buy flood insurance, but your mortgage company sure can.
If there was a way to provide FEMA to update the map, that might.
Yeah, and that's the process.
Flood insurance.
Because I'm positive that there's some areas that probably will be removed, but there's also going to be some areas that are going to do that. It's going to depend on
Simply
what that data shows. And again, there's a process, basically an appeals process
yes.
in there, both in they have public hearings, publications, all sorts of. But also after that, if you discover that your property really shouldn't be in the floodplain, as long as you have the survey information, the proof that it shouldn't be, you can be removed. Now I'm not going to tell you that's cheap because there is some cost associated with this.
And that was the biggest complaint that I got in 2010 was, well, how do I get out of it? Go find an engineer, survey your land, submit the information, and well, who's going to pay for that? Whose land is it?
It's the property.
Yes.
So that's part of the process is an engineer, the site survey, maybe look at the historical data. Along those lines.
And the main thing that they're looking for is what the elevation of the site is. And if the elevation of the site is above that 1 foot above the flood elevation, then you're not in floodplain. And that's just certifying that you're not.
This is Tara. I just wanted to say that, I know you mentioned, Josh, that we're in the process of updating the maps. The floodplain maps, like in draft form, should be available in about February of 2023. And we do have a process involved with that where the communities would review those maps and we would allow for commenting on them. And then we would respond to all of those comments, and we would also do a public open house after that. So probably, later in the spring or summer of next year, where we would come out and meet with the public and talk to them individually about any changes of the floodplain maps on their property, talk about insurance, talk about that LOMA option and hiring a surveyor if they feel they've been inadvertently included in the floodplain. So I just wanted to point those things out as part of our process for updating floodplain maps. But we're still a few years away probably from having those new effective maps.
Thank you. Thank you, Tara.
You're welcome.
Is there any more comments from public comments? I get a motion to close the public hearing.
Make a motion, we close public hearing.
Second. Public comments are closed.
And thank you for being here. You don't have to leave. Thank you for being here.
It gets way boring from here.
No, I don't like it around.
I think this is a good plan for the city and the citizens of I mean, if it's gonna save us money and protect property. I think their concern was the cost, I mean, to raise your mechanical equipment or to, raise the elevation of your house. I mean, those are very costly.
Yes.
So I think now we've kind of relieved the public of those concerns. I don't see that we get a lot of pushback on this publicly. But ultimately, we're here to serve the citizens.
Yes, we are, all
But I think that they would be okay with this as long as we're not, as long as their old stuff is grandfathered.
Well, and because this has to be approved by the city commission, we may not have a public hearing per se, unless the city commission wishes to. But there's another public presentation of this information is going to happen.
I would recommend that we approve this.
Second.
Okay. So we'll push this on to the commission with our.
We probably should do a roll call.
Yes.
Because it's an amendment change. So Mary Benton,
Yes.
Lloyd Colston,
Yes.
Ian Kuhn,
Yes.
Kyle Lewis,
Yes.
Cody Richardson,
Yes.
and Tom Whitby.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Before we adjourn, I'd like to get a statement related to the opposite of flood, and that's drought. And in the newspaper, they did an article about the county situation with water line breaks. They left out a very, I think, important part of that because they mentioned how heat destroys water lines, and they mentioned how the drought is not friendly to water lines. They missed the seismic. And yes, it takes a 4 to 6 point Richter scale to cause significant damage, but that doesn't stop a 1 point from moving the earth enough to break the pipe. If you've ever stood on the side of the road on I-40 in Oklahoma, broken down while semi trucks are thundering by you, you know that even a semi can cause the earth to move. So 8th Street is a semi thoroughfare since Summit has been closed. And since that, I've seen an increase in level 1 to 2 shaking in the area. So that's the part that the newspaper left out.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Lloyd said. So I've seen pictures of the breaks, and it's kind of somebody might know a little bit about this kind of stuff. Generally, if you see splits along the length of the pipe, that is a pressure break. That is excessive pressure on the lines. Or
Yes,
if the lines are
the newspaper did a good job explaining that.
If you see a shear, that's a ground shift.
Right.
So most of the breaks I've seen were splits along the length of the pipe. So, in the summer, the demand for water is much higher.
Right.
They have to increase the volume, which means increasing the pressure. And, I think it's pretty well known that our aging distribution system can't handle it.
It won't take much shaking to take a 100-year-old pipe away.
Definitely, that could definitely be a straw that brings the cameras back.
Well, another thing, the one I saw on 8th Street, 100 years ago, they didn't bed them properly. There wasn't any sand under there, they just threw it in there. Now there's extra runoff from the street. And, here are the city fathers, that's our master water plan we want to look at.
And in the jurisdiction I came
Needs some
from,
attention on it.
the 100-year-old pipes were wood, not clay.
Yeah, I've seen that they have one at the Wichita water plant. Wooden pipes that you're talking about. That's pretty crazy. I know modern materials will handle those kind of forces much better, much more flexible. Higher tensile strength.
90 miles of it.
The oldest one was 1940, pulled that out of W Madison
This week.
or last week.
So we're up to close to 20 now this year.
Brakes, yeah, these are pressure valve.
You're ready for another 20 next summer, right?
What?
You're ready for another 20 next summer.
It just happens, and it happens, we've got the situation of trying to keep water up north. And it's a constant battle. I mean, you can imagine, you've got all three sinks open in your house and you're battling for the water.
Yep.
It's the same thing. So we're trying to keep Bryant full, or at least partially, and trying to keep golf going, and as soon as that water hits, it's gone. But yeah, these were all press relief.
My comments certainly are not against public works because I like drinking the best water in Kansas.
Yeah.
I just think that we need to.
I've seen those guys out there working. They're doing their best. I think it's an unusual situation, but I also feel fortunate. I've been watching droughts, not just around here, but Texas and California. They put some pretty harsh restrictions on water usage. So thank God we're not subject to that, but
And
it might come to that if we don't start fixing
Lake Mead's still giving up dead people.
infrastructure. Do what?
Lake Mead is still giving up dead people.
Yeah, that's what I heard. They found one victim. Yeesh. So
That's not big meeting talk.
Yeah, mafia dumping ground for
They give up drowned boats too.
I think in a comprehensive plan, we should probably make the water distribution one of the top priorities. Yeah, is there any other comments or more?
The only other thing I would mention before we go is we do have 2 vacancies. Brandon has moved to be a growth area person. But Joni has moved to Wichita, so she cannot serve as our growth area person anymore. So there's a vacancy, still one vacancy there. By the same token, Paisley has essentially resigned, so she was the other growth. But because Brandon moved to growth area, we now have a city. So we have one. So if there's anybody that you feel would be qualified, you can either talk to me or you can talk to the mayor.
How soon do we need to fill those vacancies?
It's not a major rush, but it also makes it more difficult to get a quorum if we don't have all 5 members.
So just as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Well,
Once you accept the size of your board, though, I mean, even if you can go over, does the quorum reduce?
Ours is based on 9 members regardless because of the way it's set up. So we still have to have 5 people.
Everybody has to come.
We're here.
And of course, we still have 1 more person too.
I guess that.
Do I get a pay raise for being here?
Absolutely, double what you're making now.
That's what I thought.
plus the,
Yeah, double your minutes.
yeah, I'll put the word out.
Brandon resigned?
No, Brandon's still on the commission.
Hmm?
Brandon's still on.
Yep.
He's just couldn't be here today.
Oh, okay. So I know I hadn't been told.
No, he's still on here.
Move we adjourn.
We got
What?
7.
Move we adjourn.
Wait a second.
I'll second.
Somebody else did.
Well, we're gonna do this comprehensive plan.
Not tonight.
It's so much fun.
Yeah, we've been working on that those last few months.
Okay, we'll table that.
Thank you for coming tonight, Tara and Cheyenne.
Yes.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
So Brandon